Today's interview, we talk with Kevin Connelly. Kevin's a breathwork teacher, writer, and the founder of Reconnect Breath. With a historical and science based approach, Kevin teaches about the ways we can use our breathing to influence our body to grow stronger, resilient, and become more efficient at healing. Through Reconnect, Kevin's taken more than 4,000 people through breathwork and ice bath sessions on the beach in Mexico and has seen firsthand the powers of the body and mind in all types of people. He now trains instructors to facilitate these practices so they can make impact all around the world and teach others the simplicity of the breath body connection. So, without further ado, here's our interview with Kevin.
Hold up, one more thing. If you have not yet scheduled your 45-minute free exploration call to find out what the root cause of your symptoms are and your next steps to getting symptom free, you are going to want to pause this podcast and go do that right now. So I invite you to go to nutritionwithconfidence.com, book your free exploration call, and find out how to get your results and what is possible for you.
Kevin, I thought we would start off by asking a bit about your experience with breathwork. How did you come to breathwork in the first place? Maybe you could share just a bit about what led you to pursue a career in breathwork.
Yeah, so I was working in human rights. I was specializing in human trafficking prevention and working for an organization based in Seattle, Washington, where we were working with the private sector to help teach them what you do if you encounter a survivor of trafficking, because survivors are constantly going in and out of hotels, they're using Ubers, they're uh, using a lot of private sector businesses to be moved around. So I was working in human rights, and back then I didn't really have many tools. And, I was not working directly with survivors, but I was facilitating a lot of trainings. And so when you have this information, you're hearing a lot of stories day in and day out. You're repeating these cycles of violence so that people can understand them. I was in task forces with the Washington AG's office, and they would be telling me the stories of what they'd be encountering and who they'd be working with. And secondary trauma, is impactful. And I just didn't have the tools at that time, like I said. And a specific moment happened where I had the opportunity to identify a survivor and potentially get them out of that situation, and I missed it. And as much as other people told me it wasn't my fault, it kind of started to grow to guilt and then shame. And then that sort of led me down into depression. And I found myself suicidal and was had moved to Mexico at that point and was kind of just planning, my end. And but I was like, you know what, at the same time, I want to get out of this. I do want to heal. But I was so energetically drained at that point. I was just stuck to my couch. Like I wanted to get out and do yoga and meet people, but I just could not move. I'd also acquired all these addictions to escape from my depression. So I was drinking a lot, I was smoking a lot, I got really addicted to porn. Whatever would take me away from the feelings of depression, I would be doing those. So when I heard about breath work, I'd studied meditation with monks in Thailand for years, and I used to take groups to meditate. But I never really got into, I was one of those people that was like, yeah, I meditate. Yeah, sure, I meditate. Um, but it never really gave me the profound impact that I was looking for. So when I heard about breath work, I was like, great, I can do that on my couch. I don't have to leave the couch. I don't have to go outside, meet people. And so I just jumped right in and I started a instructor course. And within about 10 days, my depression was gone. My anxiety was gone. My insomnia was gone. Like everything changed. And I had an uncle who took his own life from depression. I've had family members, who have gone through depression, were on medications for years, and friends who were on medications for years, and they never got through it. And then here comes me, like in 10 days, I completely got rid of this. So from that point, I just completely shifted gears and just put all of my energy and motivation towards understanding what had just happened to me, what had happened in my body, what happened in my mind. How was I able to go from the lowest point in my life to feeling like this is the best part of my life
Yeah.
in such a fast period of time? So that was really what sparked it. But then what further got me into it was, how deep the world of breathing goes. It's like yoga or music, it's just this endless canyon that goes on and on and on and on and on. And you find out like that breathing affects so much more, than just allowing you to find a place of calm. It affects your nervous system, your endocrine system, your brain, your heart, uh, your circulatory system, right? Like everything. So I was just absolutely fascinated by it. And yeah, and then began teaching from that point.
Uh, well, one, Kevin, thanks for sharing so vulnerably. I know that we've both known a lot of people who suffer from depression. We've all both experienced our own flavors of depression, and I think it's so powerful and courageous to share your experiences because it connects so much to folks who are in a similar place. And I'm so struck that in 10 days you saw such shifts. How long were you meditating, doing this breath work how many hours each day, or what did that look like?
I think it was about in between 1 to 2 hours a day.
Okay.
During that time, I also did my first ice bath, and that was a huge shift. And I don't love to throw out the term nervous system reset, because I think a nervous system reset is a combination of things that you do, and it takes time to do it. So at first, that's what it felt like, but really what it was, when I went into the ice for the first time, after months, 6 months of just all this negative self-talk of like, the best part of your life is over. You've never really done anything with your life. You're not gonna do anything with your life. With so much negative self-talk, you get into the ice and your brain starts up again. And it's like, you can't do it. You can't do it. Like, just get out, just get out. But then, and I started kind of shaking my head, no. And the facilitator was like, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Breathe, breathe. So I just breathe, kept breathing, kept breathing. And then you reach that point where you're like, okay, I can do this. And that's when I had a big shift, and it was like, yes, I'm in control. Like, I'm in control of my body, but I'm also in control of my brain. And that's when the negative self-talk stopped.
Mm.
And I was able to catch myself when I started up on that negativity. I was like, no, 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 that's not me. That's the depressed Kevin. Like, this is not the depressed Kevin. So that really taught me a lot. But it was also, it was learning the different dysfunctions that we all have, which I had many at the time. So it was a lot of it was just little changes,
Yeah.
but I was able to make several little changes in a really quick period of time because I went through a training.
How long was the training entirely? Like, how long is that training typically last for?
Yeah, so I did one that was just at your own pace. And I think it was supposed to take 2 months, and I did it in 2 weeks,
That's amazing.
because I was just like eating it up every day. I felt like I had a little bit back. I had connected a little bit more, because I was in this place of such disconnection with my body, and it started really shifting, because up until that point, my eating had gotten so terrible. I was smoking cigarettes again. I was drinking a lot. And when I joined, they were like, "We don't take smokers." So I was like, "Okay, I'm not a smoker, I promise." But as soon as I started really breathing functionally and deep, breathing the way that you're supposed to breathe, I stopped craving that Doritos and donuts and what are the other D words? Just the food that you think will make you feel better, that maybe gives you a momentary feeling of joy, and only followed by feeling terrible afterwards. So it was kind of like a cascade of things. Like I quit smoking cigarettes, and then I quit eating bad food, and then I slowed my drinking down, and it was just one thing after another, and then I quit porn, and um, so it was kind of just the beginning of really changing my life in so many ways.
And
Another D word is it's like all the dopamine hit
Ah,
foods,
yeah,
and
thank you, good
I
one.
guess that encompasses all of those things. I
Mhm.
just thought of that, but that's amazing.
Yeah,
and Kevin, I was curious to hear a bit more about that process of connecting to yourself. I mean, I can imagine the breath work and ice bath really lend themselves to connecting more to your body, but could you just speak more to what those practices look like in terms of thickening your connection with your body?
absolutely. So if I can, I might explain the full scope of this, because I think breathing nowadays, people don't understand how much you can use this to change the way that you think about things and change the way you think about habits. So, for example, when I was really addicted to porn, porn is one of these things like scrolling, like alcohol, like cigarettes. It's not because of stress or anxiety or fear. It's because you want to avoid stress and anxiety and fear, right? It's about avoidance and escape. So when you start to feel those emotions, that stress or that, work or even boredom, right? We don't want to feel bored nowadays. We want to feel happy. We want to look like all those people on social media. So we'll grab that thing to escape that emotion. But what is that emotion really? Emotion is just a vibration, right? It's a sensation in your body. And sometimes you start to feel that emotion, and especially with like an addiction or something like porn, that emotion, you might use really dramatic words. You might say like, I'm uncontrolled, like I'm out of control. I have absolutely no control over my body. It's just absolute, like I'm on a roller coaster and I'm being taken. But when you stop, and when you close your eyes, and when you start to breathe nice and slow, and you start to name the sensations in your body, right? When you can name what those sensations are, suddenly it's not about being out of control or being overtaken, right? It's about tightness. Like I have a little bit of tightness in my shoulders. I have this antsy feeling in my stomach. I have this like moving sort of claustrophobic or clenched feeling in my hips, right? So when you can actually start to name these sensations and then breathe into these sensations, you can allow them to pass. And most urges, when you have an urge for something, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs or whatever they may be, most urges only last 60 to 90 seconds. And we usually indulge in them in, 5 seconds of having that urge, right? But if we can stop and take a few breaths and close our eyes and start to name those specific sensations in our body and allow them to pass through us, then we can get control over this thing. So, I always think of urges like it's a screaming toddler at the grocery store, right? You take the toddler to the grocery store and they want something and you say no, and they start freaking out. They start yelling, they're throwing things, right? So the first way that you can deal with this is you can yell and scream at the toddler, right? So they're like, no, I'm not giving you that. I've already told you a million times. It's very similar to using willpower, right? When we just try and use willpower to overcome something, we're using so much energy. And in the end, willpower is just like a beach ball. When you put it underwater, the more you try and push it under, you lose your grip, and then the beach ball just comes back out, right? So we can yell and scream at this child, but that normally doesn't work. And then people are calling child services and freaking out on you. Okay. So the other option is to just give the toddler what they want. And that, ends it in the moment, right? But it just teaches that toddler, like, okay, whenever I want this, I just cry. So every time they want something, they just start freaking out, which is, not a way to fix something. The last way is you let the toddler scream and cry and go through it, which is a little bit harder in the moment. It's a little bit embarrassing, but in the end, it takes less energy, but you just have to sit there and listen to it. And once the toddler learns that crying and screaming and freaking out isn't going to get me what I want, they're going to stop doing it eventually. And it's the same thing with urges like this, right? And so breathing, when you learn how to breathe functionally, especially functionally, it's so much easier to get in touch with your body so that you can say, okay, this is the urge that I'm feeling. This is the sensation that I'm feeling. This is the emotion that I'm feeling, especially for men, right? Women are much better at this. But men have a really difficult problem with really understanding which emotion I'm feeling right now, and especially the sensations. Because how it works is we have an urge, we have a sensation, an emotion, and then we choose whether to indulge in that or not. So with men, a lot of times the sensation happens quickly, right? It goes from that emotion to the sensation to the urge. And so they kind of skip over that part. So what I actually do with men now is I give them a list of sensation words. Like, here's a whole list. Read through this list. Start understanding these words a little bit better so that when these things do come up, you know that you stop, you breathe, you start thinking about what those sensations are so that you can name them, and then you just let it pass. And it's so cool, like how many people I've gotten to get through something like a porn addiction just by allowing their urges to pass through them. And it's one of the most empowering. And I didn't realize, like, when I first started doing this, that this was not the common tactic. Like when I read about, how people quit things online, it's all like, oh yeah, put blockers on your computer and all these different tools to just keep it away. But that doesn't decondition your brain, right? It kind of goes back to Pavlov's dogs, right? When he would ring the bell, the dogs would salivate, and then he would feed the dogs. For those of you listening who are familiar with this, if you guys don't mind if I just explain this really quick. So Pavlov was trying to understand, like, when his dogs would salivate. So he noticed that when his assistant would walk to feed the dogs, they would start salivating because he had put these little sensors in their mouths. And so he said, okay, I'm going to try something different. So he would ring a bell and then feed the dogs. And so he would find that every time he rang the bell, the dogs would salivate. And then he would feed the dogs. The dogs would salivate. Then he would feed the dogs. And so he realized that he had conditioned their brains to expect that reward. Now, if you would have taken those dogs, put them on an island for a year, left them, and then brought them back, and he would have rang that bell, they still would have salivated, right? Because they hadn't deconditioned their brain to not expect a reward. So what he did was he rang the bell and didn't feed them. Ring the bell, didn't feed them. Ring the bell, didn't feed them. And eventually they stopped salivating. So that's the same thing that we can do. And what I'll do for you guys at the end of our discussion today, I can guide you through one of those exercises where you use your breath to really try and pinpoint the different sensations and emotions in your body and just allow those to pass through you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the toddler screaming, you know. I think we all have in some way or another that toddler screaming inside of us, and just telling that toddler to stop or ignoring the toddler just makes the toddler scream more, right? And perpetuates this cycle of that emotion coming up, the stress, the shame, whatever it is that's leading then to addiction, those urge, addictive behaviors, and how powerful to slow down, focus on your breath, focus on your body, and connect with yourself, connect with those parts. From my experience, when I do slow down and connect with my emotions, they release, soften a bit and aren't as intense and ultimately subside. That's a that's a truth. The emotions, whatever they are, they don't persist infinitely. There is an
They're
end.
temporary.
They're temporarily, and leaning into those parts is so contrary to what a lot of us do, because we're like, oh, that feeling is unpleasant, undesirable. So I'm just so what what powerful work to embrace that part of us that is. And as you're talking about, I'll speak to my experience as a man too. Growing up, we're just conditioned from such a young age to push, I think even women too, to really push certain emotions and feelings down. And it is such an important practice, I think, for all of us in this modern context to take time to slow down and connect internally.
Well, I think you're similar, maybe around similar age to me, and I'm sure you remember the famous quote, like, "How much can you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight?" Right? That Tyler Durden Fight Club famous quote. Like we were raised, especially as men, but also as, for women too, like we're raised to fight for who we love, fight for our country, fight for everything. So this fight mentality is so deeply ingrained in our nature that we feel like that's what we apply to everything, right? That's how we'll get through everything. We'll just push and fight and claw, and eventually we'll get through it. But when it comes to things like, habits or addictions that we don't want, fighting is often, the last thing to do, because in the end, it just takes all of our energy. And, even some of the most famous people in the world, like uh no, I just forgot his name. Um two really famous writers, Hemingway.
Eckhart, is it Eckhart Tolle?
um Tolstoy and Tolstoy.
Tolstoy.
Thank you. Both of these guys, Tolstoy really struggled with womanizing. With Hemingway, it was more about alcohol, but they both wrote about this extensively, about how, they were trying to quit, like they were trying to use their willpower to get through this. And in the end, Hemingway died relatively early from his over abuse of alcohol. Tolstoy, it wasn't until the age of 50, 55, when he finally realized, like, I can't just keep fighting this. I need to completely just change who I am as a person. And then he led a much more monastic lifestyle. But there's examples all over the world of just people trying to push, push, push. And as I said, again, it's like that beach, trying to push that beach ball underwater. The more you push it, and sometimes you can keep it under for a little bit, but when you start to lose your grip just a tiny, it pops out and you're back to square one. So I think, for men and women, using these practices and using your breathing to simply just allow rather than to try and fight, I think is a much more successful and much more empowering practice.
Mm. Yeah. I wonder if you can get into some more of like what are the common breathing issues and how common are they, and why this is so prevalent among people just being so reactive and giving into our urges so quickly. What I was going to say, going back to the difference of men and women too, um, you were saying that that quick urge comes sooner. And I feel like a lot of women kind of get stuck in like the sensation feeling loop. I don't know if that's something that you've seen at all. That's just a second side comment, but if you want to say something about that and then the modern breathing issues that we're facing today.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the modern breathing issues first. So,
Mhm.
one of the first and probably most common breathing dysfunctions is mouth breathing. And interestingly enough, so one of my first mentors in breathwork was James Nestor, who's wrote the book Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. And I don't know if you remember it in that book, he tries to trace back, when did we start going wrong? When did we start devolving? And when did our breathing start becoming so poor? He describes humans as the worst breathers in the animal kingdom. And one of the things that he traces it back to is the 1860s or 1850s when they started canning food. They started jarring food. And he equates this to how we stopped using our jaw. And so our jaws actually started to get smaller and smaller, and this started reducing the size of our airways. So it made it more difficult for people to breathe through their nose. And so what happens is they just started reverting to breathing through their mouth. So when you breathe through your mouth, one of the major things that happens is rather than the air going through your nose and going through your nasal cavity, which is humidifying, filtering, warming, or cooling the air depending on the outside temperature, it's just going straight to the back of your throat. So it's all this unfiltered air, unhumidified air hitting the back of your throat. And what naturally happens is that it's all these germs just hitting your adenoids and your tonsils. And so your adenoids and your tonsils start to get inflamed and they start to grow and grow and grow. And suddenly, when you try to breathe through your nose, it's really difficult. So for a lot of people, they're just like, yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me. I don't know why, but it's hard for me to breathe through my nose. And most doctors don't understand where this is coming from. And a lot of times people will inaccurately be diagnosed with a deviated septum. Sometimes this is the case, but a lot of times, and I've seen this in my instructor trainings where people have come in saying it's very difficult for me to breathe through my nose. So I'll be giving them all these different exercises and ways to keep their mouth shut all the time. And after time, they start being like, okay, it's getting easier. It's getting easier. We've had people whose jaws have completely realigned, like people whose jaws were clicking their whole life, and their
Mm.
jaws just sort of slowly move back into place.
Wow.
Because a lot of that inflammation is pushing their face forward. So for some of these people, their noses get bigger, they're getting bags, like dark circles under their eyes, their jaws are starting to get less defined. It completely changes the shape of your face. The other thing with mouth breathing is, especially if you're snoring at night, if you're doing this all throughout the course of the night, Mouth breathing is engaging your sympathetic nervous system. So that fight or flight activity is happening on a lower scale, but it's happening all the time if you're breathing through your mouth. So if you think about going to sleep at night and lying down and just constantly sending these signals to your body to protect yourself, right? All that energy is going to your extremities. It's going out to your fingers and your toes to prepare your limbs to fight. So a lot of people who sleep with their breathing through their mouth, they wake up and they feel really tired. They feel really exhausted. There's a million other things with mouth breathing but I won't go into all of them. But that's one of the most common. I would say the other one is chest breathing, which is very kind of acquainted with mouth breathing. And Dr. Melissa Vranich, who is a breath expert and amazing author, and she's written all about this. She was doing a lot of research on when breathing goes wrong. Like when do we go from breathing from our belly to breathing with our chest and our shoulders? And she found that it was right around the age of 5 that kids stop breathing correctly. And she said this is because kids are watching adults, they're seeing how adults breathe, and they're just mimicking them. And they're getting these signals from society that our bellies aren't sexy, they're not good looking, and you have to suck your belly in if you have one. And so they start sucking their belly in. And naturally, when you suck your belly in, all your breathing goes up into your chest. And when you're breathing with your chest, not only can you not breathe deeply and fully, but you start using all these auxiliary breathing muscles around your shoulders. You start activating your neck. And so a lot of people start getting really bad pain, cramps in their shoulders, in their neck, and then that leads to migraines a lot. And so they're going to the doctor complaining of migraines. And, most times the doctor's not correcting their breathing. Because I don't know if you guys remember, like as kids going to the doctor and they would say, okay, take a deep breath in. What would you do? Right? You would
Yeah.
do that. I remember always lifting up my shoulders, trying to breathe in as deep as I can.
Mm.
And that's another breathing dysfunction, right? When we breathe vertically, we breathe up because we think like that's how we get in the most air. But how we should be breathing is horizontally, so out to the sides. Animals are great teachers of how we should be breathing. When you see, like, especially a dog, when you see a dog take a deep sigh when he's lying on the ground, his whole body goes outwards, right? He's not breathing up into like up to his head. He's breathing out. And so that's exactly the same way that we should be breathing is horizontally, or you can call it circumferentially, but really using our belly and our ribs. A lot of people don't realize like we should be moving out to the sides as well, rather than breathing up and down. I would say the other probably most common one is unconscious breath holding, which happens a lot. Every time you open your email inbox and you see like we need to talk, you're just like right. And you're just kind of unconsciously doing those breath holds, especially like that, right? Because the inhale activates the sympathetic. Every time you take a breath in, your heart rate goes up a little bit. Every time you breathe out, your heart goes down a little bit. So if you're constantly doing those unconscious breath holds out of fear, which is what a lot of people do, I see this all the time. You're just constantly activating your sympathetic and then keeping your body there for a moment. So a lot of what I do in my work is kind of help correct people's breathing patterns and get them into a more coherent breathing pattern where all throughout the course of the day, it just keeps popping into their mind, like, what's my breathing? What's my breathing? Am I breathing on my mouth? Am I breathing on my nose? Am I breathing slow and deep? Or am I breathing really short and shallow? So yeah, I would say those are probably some of the most common dysfunctions that I see nowadays.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, I have a lot of clients who, have air hunger or feelings of like just this tight band around their chest. And, there's it's difficult for them to exhale for a long enough time to do like the 4-7-8 breathing, or even holding their breath is challenging for them. So there, I think, and then a lot of my clients have chronic illness, they have autoimmune conditions, they have high blood sugars, they have all of these connections and to chronic illness. And I know you've talked a lot about at times like what the research is showing with this, with the breath work connected to chronic illness. Can you talk about that some more?
Yeah. So there was back in 2016, they started doing research on a little creature called the naked mole rat. And these naked mole rats live in these underground bungalows, whole community environments, whatever you want to call them, pretty deep underground in these very low oxygen environments. And they started finding that in these communities, there were virtually no disease. In regular rat populations, there's disease all over the place, right? Tons of disease. But with these naked mole rats, there was nothing. And so they started doing some tests on these naked mole rats, and they started to find that they could hold their breath for crazy periods of time, like 10, 12, 13 minutes. And they would be fine. Sometimes they would go into these states of like hibernation where their body would sort of just like really slow down. And they thought that they were dying, but they were just conserving their oxygen. And so when you compare these naked mole rats to the other rat populations, these naked mole rats were living up to 35 years. Most rats is like 4, 5, 6 years. But these naked mole rats were free of disease and living 6 times longer than their counterparts. Super weird, especially for how small these animals were. Like most animals at that size, they're 2 to 5 years max. So they started seeing that, and they started to kind of connect. Maybe this is about their ability to withstand carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide still has this really terrible name. When you look it up now, I think it still says, carbon dioxide is a waste gas. And that's partly true. But carbon dioxide, when it's in your bloodstream, when it starts to build in your bloodstream, it's a vasodilator. So it starts to open your blood vessels and create better circulation. So, in times when you start to feel like brain fog or tired, all you can do is take a breath in through your nose, breathe out, and then hold it. And just hold it for 10 to 15 seconds or however long you can. You don't have to, make yourself lightheaded or dizzy or anything like that. But in that short period of time, your blood vessels are going to start to open. And so the blood is going to start flowing up to your brain faster. And it's going to help you get through that brain fog and through that low energy. So carbon dioxide is actually this amazing chemical in our body that we just don't take advantage of enough. And so some people were saying, well, it's just one animal. Like what's the big deal? Like it's just a naked mole rat. But then they started doing research at the Buteyko Institute, and they found that people with cancer, people with asthma, people with diabetes, people with heart disease, all these different diseases that can potentially be fatal, they were all breathing at rates twice the time of a regular person. So their breathing was much, much, much more. When you're breathing more, you're pushing all your carbon dioxide out of your body. Okay, when you're breathing less, when you're breathing slow and deep, it gives your body time to allow that carbon dioxide to build in the bloodstream. And so the more you can do this, the more you can improve your health. And this is something that we've known forever, for so long. When you look at all the ancient breathing techniques. So Tumo, which is the ancient Tibetan breathing practice. The monks used to use this as they'd be crossing the Himalayas. They do this very intense breathing technique where they're visualizing all the different energy flowing through their body and colors, and but they're doing this as it's kind of a breath holding technique. And so they're breathing only about one time a minute. Uh, in Qigong, over in China, right, they're cultivating the qi. That's all breathing exercises. It's similar. It's about 3 to 5 breaths a minute. Um, Pranayama from India, right? Similar. All those breathing practices, probably 2 to 6 breaths a minute. Even in Native America, the Native American tribes, the Mandan and the Sioux tribes, and James Nestor wrote about this in his book as well. The Mandan tribes, the mothers used to actually pinch their babies' mouths closed to prevent them from breathing through their mouth. And the more research that we do with those kind of tribes, the more it's all about breathing less and less and less and less. So this is something that we've known forever, forever. We've known about this for such a long time, but we've just sort of forgotten about it. The other amazing thing with carbon dioxide, especially with breath holding, and so when you talk about, people have a hard time holding their breath, for me, that's about practicing breathing through your nose more, practicing breathing through your nose when you're exercising, when you're walking, when you're doing everything. The more you practice always breathing through your nose, the easier that's going to become. Because then you can start doing some conscious breath holding, right? Another way we phrase that as intermittent hypoxic training. So, excuse me, intermittent hypoxic training is when you're bringing your body to low levels of oxygen, high levels of carbon dioxide. And amazing things happen in your body when you're doing this. One of them being stem cells start to wake up. And it's really cool. So when we're in the womb, we have stem cells all throughout our body, right? It's building our body, it's making connections, it's doing all these things. And our body's oxygen level is equal to that of about Mount Everest. So really, really low oxygen when we're in the womb. The moment we're born, all those stem cells start to go into hiding. As we age, the stem cells start to die off, and eventually we get to a certain age and they're pretty much gone. But throughout our lives, they're always there, but they're not active because they don't like the oxygen-rich environments that we're constantly living in. Mm. So when you're able to hold your breath, and I'm talking longer breath holds, more than a minute and a half, 2 minutes, those stem cells start waking up. And what happens when they wake up is they start going to any area of your body that needs repair, and they start repairing it. They start going into your brain and making new connections. They were only doing these studies on animals for a long time, but now with the emergence of breath work and how amazing this practice is, they've started doing it on athletes. And they're finding that when athletes do these intermittent hypoxic sessions after training, their muscles are recovering 5 times faster because these stem cells are just going and repairing as fast as they can. So carbon dioxide is just one of these amazing things, kind of amazing like byprocesses that occurs when you're able to slow your breath, breathe through your nose, and take slow, calm inhales and exhales.
So how is that different than someone who's doing the breath holding, but not purposefully, I guess?
Yeah.
Can you describe the difference?
Conscious.
Ah.
Yeah, when you're doing it consciously versus unconsciously. Because when you're doing it consciously, you're signaling to your body like, I'm okay. Everything's okay, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you're doing, you're breathing fast before you do the breath hold. Some people, I was recently doing a training and we were doing some fast breathing and then some breath holds, and they're like, I don't get it. Like, I thought breath work was supposed to make you calm. Like, this is activating your sympathetic nervous system. Like, that's not making you calm. 100% it's not making you calm. And first of all, breathwork is designed for a million different things, right? It's like, you don't say, oh, you're going to the gym. Is that because you're trying to look ripped? Is that because you want your biceps to really stick out? No, we all go to the gym for different reasons. When you're doing breathing faster, more activated breathing, it's about learning how to manage yourself in your sympathetic, right? Because when those situations do occur in real life, when you get anxious, when you get stressed, when you're in traffic, when you're in line in the grocery store, someone says something to you that you feel is super rude, and suddenly your sympathetic kicks in, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up. You've practiced this. You know how to deal with this, right? So it's about getting accustomed to that feeling and learning how to have control over them. I like to call it parasympathetic activation and sympathetic suppression, right? So when your sympathetic kicks in and you don't want it to kick in, you calm your breathing, you breathe through your nose, and you activate your parasympathetic. And so that's why I like to do both with my clients and my instructors. Is like I'll do some slow breathing, some fast breathing. It's important to know both of those because we use different breathing exercises for different things in our life, depending on whether we want to activate ourselves or calm ourselves down.
One thing I love so much about breath work and all you're talking about is just as you're speaking, I'm tuning into my breath more. And I'm sure
Yeah.
for everyone who's listening, like just by listening to you speak here, you can already start to practice that conscious breath. And I know Natalie and I got into breath work a couple of years ago. We learned about James Nestor's work and the importance of nasal breathing and I remember when I first started doing it, just as you were talking about, I had such a hard time. I've had, so much congestion. It's like chronic with my dad, with my sister. And so I could barely breathe through my nose. I'm like, I don't know if this is possible to breathe through my nose. But as I started to do it more and more, it was over, I think, 2 or 3 months it became easy. Now I do it consciously every day. Like 90% of the day, I'm definitely breathing through my nose. And I also noticed when I first started doing it, walking up hills, exercising was very difficult for me to hold on to the nasal breathing. But now I just noticed there's this one hill by our house. As I was practicing nasal breathing, sure enough, by the end of like 2 or 3 months, I was able to just do complete nasal breathing up this hill. Whereas when I started, I was just, sucking air through my mouth. And I think it really has forced me to slow down my breath. It seems hard to it seems hard for me to breathe quickly when I am breathing nasally. And yeah, I love what a simple tool that is. And I do find, like you're talking about, the more I've practiced it, it really is regulating. And so when I am in high stress situations, it is this great tool to just kind of fall back on and focus on the breath and then show up in relationships as a better me.
It's a
Yeah.
game changer, right? And
Yeah.
even for people who are talking a lot, for teachers, for coaches, for anyone who's working with clients a lot of the time and they're talking a lot, right? Have you ever found that at the end of the day, maybe you had like 6, 7, 8 clients that you were working with, and you're working the whole day at your desk, and you end those that day, and you're like, I'm absolutely exhausted. But I was just sitting here, like, sure, it takes mental focus, right? But a lot of times, if you think about like when you're talking a lot, you're breathing through your mouth. Okay.
Mhm.
When you're breathing through your mouth a lot, you're activating your sympathetic. So your heart rate's going up, your blood pressure's going up, but you're sitting still, right? So you're not activating your body. So the level of stimulation isn't matching the level of activation. Part of the reason why you feel so good when you go to the gym is because you're breathing hard and you're exercising your muscles, right? So you leave the gym and you're like, oh, I feel great. But when we're just talking, and not moving, we don't have that. And so what I normally tell people is when you're doing that, like if you're talking, okay, if you're speaking with a client and you start noticing like, wow, I'm just going a lot, I'm talking a lot, I always tell them like activate the pause, right? So when you get to a point, stop, pause, take a slow breath in, exhale, and then continue. Because that is also going to help like your client. Whenever someone pauses, what do? You lean in a little bit, right? So technically it's a really good storytelling tactic, but it also gives you that moment to stop and take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. So I try to do this as much as I can, if I have days where I'm speaking a lot. But for sure, afterwards, I'm going to stop and do 5 to 10 minutes of slow, deep nasal breathing. And I'll try to do it before that as well. But what I've noticed is like I start every day with probably at least 10 minutes of 6 second coherent breaths. So just 6 seconds in, seconds out through my nose. Once I started doing that, my body required less sleep. I went from waking up at 8 a.m. to waking up at 5 a.m. in about 2 months. Like this happened very quickly. My body just didn't need to recover as much. The other really cool thing that happened was I stopped peeing at night. And I'm still kind of trying to find the research. And I've asked so many doctors who are into breath work about this, and they're like, yeah, I can't give you an answer on that. But yeah, I used to wake up once or twice a night, all the time to pee. Now I don't wake up at all. I sleep through the entire night. It's wild.
Interesting. That is fascinating. Do you think it's regulated your cortisol pattern more? Because sometimes that's what I've seen when people have to urinate in the middle of the night. We think it's like we have to pee to wake us up, but what's actually waking us up is our cortisol is getting activated, and it's irregular because of all the light exposure we have to blue light and dysregulated sleep habits, and we're not getting consistent wake times or getting enough sunlight from the sun being outside. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's not like I won't sleep entirely through the night every night by any means. I will wake up a couple times, sometimes, but I
Mhm.
don't wake up and have to pee.
Hmm. Interesting.
So it definitely could be related to it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think there could be a strong correlation with cortisol levels and regular breathing practices do help so much to regulate cortisol levels, especially when you do it first thing when you wake up and when you do it before you go to sleep at night, which I think is something that a lot of people don't ever do. But I
Mhm.
think, within an hour before you go to bed, doing a coherent practice like that, 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, will greatly help reduce your cortisol levels from whatever was happening during the day. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I wanted
They act.
to,
Oh,
oh,
go on.
I wanted to track back to that, what you're talking about of the pause, because I think it's so powerful. I'm noticing even in my body during our conversation, as you're taking pauses, it's just a sigh, you know? I think of some of the more effective communicators and teachers in my life. They are so good with pausing, slowing down, and there is a concept in the psychotherapy world of co-regulation. And I just love how when we are engaged in these practices of pausing, of slowing down, uh, it's positively affecting those around us. And I think we could talk about breath work for another hour here, but I want to switch gears to the cold exposure, the deliberate cold exposure. You talked a bit about ice baths. Will you just talk a bit about the benefits of ice baths, cold showers, getting in a cold body of water?
Yes. I will preface this with, people always ask me like, why do you do it? And over time, there's been numerous reasons why I've done it. And it wasn't until recently that I kind of realized the real deep reason why I started doing it, which was to practice feeling, right? Practice feeling pain, practice feeling those negative. I mean, it's not a negative emotion, but it's not pleasure, right? When you get into the ice, it's not pleasure, it's not joy, it's not happiness, it's pain. And so I think that's why part of the reason why I loved it so much when I first started doing it is because it started to help me to sit with something that wasn't positive. And over time, I've gotten, better. That has allowed me to sit more with boredom because we're living in this world where it's like you have the internet, you should never be bored. But I think boredom is just part of the human experience, and that's okay. And I think the really successful people out there, they get very good at dealing with boredom. They get very good at dealing with loneliness. They get very good at dealing with sadness. Um, so I think that for me, that's a big part of it. In terms of what's happening in your body, I love norepinephrine. I think norepinephrine, I have a feeling it doesn't have as nice a tone as dopamine, but I think norepinephrine is cooler because it's, for those of you who have taken antidepressants, a lot of antidepressants are norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors because they said, you know what, a lot of people who experience depression have really low norepinephrine levels in their body. And so we're going to give them a pill that helps to boost their norepinephrine levels. But going into the cold, going into an ice bath is naturally going to really boost those norepinephrine levels. And I think that's part of why people feel so good when they get out of the cold, is because those levels have gone way up. I think the other part is stress control and tolerance. So as that first minute you're in the cold, your body's being stressed. You hit into sympathetic, you're breathing faster, your heart rate starts to go up for a moment, and you're stressed. And so what do? At least how we do it on the beach here, we teach everyone like you're breathing slow, deep breaths. So this teaches your brain that when you're stressed, you don't freak out, you don't start yelling, you don't run away, you breathe slow and deep. So your brain starts to remember that. The more you do it, the more you consciously stress your body and breathe at this slow, deep pattern, your brain starts to remember this activity. Like, this is what I do when I get stressed. So we're kind of retraining ourselves in how we deal with stress. So I think that's for me, that's one of the coolest things about it. I think the last one, and I can talk all about, like, if you want to get a little bit deeper into the science, I can do that too. But I think the other one is, and what I hear from so many people who go to our sessions, and I think at this point we've had 5,000 people come through on the beach here in Mexico, is it helped me to do the things that I was too afraid to do before. And because I thought that they were too hard, I started putting up walls. I started making excuses as to why I wasn't going to be able to do it. But when I did the ice bath, which I thought I wasn't going to get through it, and then I actually did it, I realized, okay, I thought that was impossible, and I just did that. What's next? What's next for me? So
Mhm.
I think that's probably one of the coolest things that I've heard from people, like how they really start changing things in their life after they do an ice bath because they start breaking down those walls, they start breaking down those barriers, those excuses, those reasons why they couldn't do something. They start realizing like I can do it. Like I just sat in a bucket of freezing cold water. Like if I can do that, I can do anything. So it's so much more than, it's great for inflammation, right? It's great for losing weight. It activates a lot of brown fat in the body. Brown fat is eating your carbs and helping you lose weight to create that heat and internal energy. Um, it's really amazing for your skin. Like it has all these benefits, but I think the mental part, it's great for your sex drive. Like cold exposure is really good for the circulatory system, right? Stronger, better orgasms come when you have a good circulatory system. Um, had to throw that in there. But again, I really do think it's the most important part of why people come back week and again is because it's a practice of this mental game. Like I'm stronger, I'm better, I know I can do this.
Mhm. Do you think it's a good place for people to start at home with cold showers, or would you say there is a real difference with the submersion? I'm trying to find that.
I actually think cold showers can be harder depending on how cold your water is because it's moving on
Mm.
you. So I tell people like start, you can buy tubs now. When I started doing this, there was one tub on Amazon that you could buy portable, like one portable tub. Now there's like 5,000. So go on Amazon, you can buy a super cheap tub and have one or two friends over and get some ice. You don't have to make it very cold. Like I say when you first start out, it can be 7 to 10 Celsius, like 45 to 50 Fahrenheit, or even closer to 50 Fahrenheit. It doesn't need to be that cold. It just needs to be cold enough where it's difficult for you. As long as it's doing that, it's doing its job. As long as you have to go through that phase of like, okay, I need to breathe, I need to breathe, I need to breathe, and then it gets easier, then it's great. Then you can slowly start bringing the temperature down a little bit. But from, the more research that's coming out, it really doesn't need to be that cold. People are always trying to go like for longer periods of time which I think is really, it's not smart. I think that's the fastest way to bring yourself to hypothermia. I think it's the fastest way to just take away all the benefits that you were just going to have.
Mm.
So I always think, no more than 5 minutes. I think 3 minutes is great. And I never like to go below 5 Celsius, which is about 40, 41 Fahrenheit. I don't think you have any reason to go below that. But yeah, it's all like, you don't run a marathon. You don't train for a marathon by running marathons, right? You train by running short little stints. So it's the same thing with the cold exposure.
Mhm. So when someone new comes, do you encourage them to go the full 3 minutes, or if they get out at 1 minute, or what do you say about that?
We encourage them to go the full time.
Yeah.
Sometimes they won't make it. And so they'll get out and we'll let them have a moment. And then I'll talk to them. I'll be like, okay, now you know what it's like. Now let's go back and try it again. And I would say 99% of people do it the second time because for some it's just so much of a shock. And for others, they start feeling those emotions coming up
Mm.
and they don't necessarily want to face those emotions. But that's what's so powerful about the ice. Like it really, we store so much in our bodies. I know you guys know all about this, about what we store in our bodies, right?
Yes.
So when we get into the cold like that, it just brings those things up to the surface. And women are actually, I've found women are a lot better at dealing with the cold because they're used to dealing with their emotions, right? I've had guys, big dudes, military dudes come in and they are freaking out. It's very, very difficult for them because they're not used to it, and we have a group there and they don't want to show their emotions in a group.
Mhm.
So it can be more difficult and more challenging for the men. But I think for the women, I seems a little bit a little easier for them. Um, but yeah, there's been so many times like we have someone crying every single week or multiple people crying every single week. People just have these amazing transformations in the cold, and I think it's again, it goes back to like I didn't think I was strong enough to do this. And anytime you prove to yourself, like, I was strong enough to do this, especially when you're in a place of, depression or anxiety or guilt or shame, and you start kind of breaking those layers down and you start building that confidence up again, it's such a massive win.
Yeah. Now, what's the frequency of in the week that you recommend for people to start with? I know you have experienced some change, like differences in um, how you started doing it more frequently, and then now how many times do you do it?
Yeah. Now I only do it once or twice a week. Um, when I first started, I was doing it once a week. I was doing it once a week on the beach here for about a year. And then I started doing it 3 times a week. And suddenly my whole body changed. I wasn't overweight, but I was inflamed. I was just inflamed. That's the best way to say it. And so when I started doing it 3 times a week, all that inflammation went away. My body just completely changed. People are like, "Whoa, like, have you lost weight?" I said, I don't think I lost weight." But then I saw 2 photos side by side, and I was like, "Oh my God, like, yes, I did." Then I started doing it 5 times a week because we started doing sessions Wednesday through Sunday, and I started losing weight. So I was like, okay, that's probably too much. So it really just depends on what you're doing it for. I think along with exercising, it's a great thing to add into your routine. For me, I have a really fast metabolism, so I now only do it once or twice a week, and I find that's perfect. Starting out, I think twice is fine. Even once is okay. Like we have some people who, for 3 years, they've been coming once a week. That's all they need. And every week they're like, "Oh my God, like for the last 4 days, I've been really craving to get back in." Your body gets so used to it. It gets so used to recovering faster. Your body just feels a little bit tighter. You feel a little bit better. Um, the way it impacts people, it's different for everybody. But yeah, I would say, try just short at first, once or twice a week. And then if you feel like doing a little bit more, you can slowly
Have
add.
you have you heard of any women doing it too frequently and it quote unquote crashing their thyroid and then they start gaining weight? Because I've heard this is like a story, but I personally haven't seen that.
Hmm.
Um, but if maybe you have, I don't know, it could be.
I haven't. I haven't. I would be very open to hearing all about that.
Mhm.
I have not personally seen that. And the majority, like I would say 65% of who we get are women. So I've met and, spoken with thousands of women going through this, and I have not heard that yet. So,
I'd be curious.
so yeah.
Cool.
I love the community aspect of what you're doing as well with getting a group together, doing something hard, you know, you got everyone around you supporting you to get to that 3 minutes in the ice bath. I know for me it was so difficult when I was first doing it, but we for a while we were doing every week or every other week we're going to a local river here in Southern Oregon, and we'd have 3 to 5 people, I think maybe 6 or 7 show up, and we all just get in together. Some people just, hop in, hop because that river could get really cold. But, we had a good group that just get in, do something hard together. I love that communal piece. And I wanted to ask you about maybe safety considerations. I know I've heard with the Tumo breathing that you were talking about. I know Wim Hof is kind of a spin off that. And I've heard of people doing Wim Hof, getting into a body of water and actually passing out. And some people actually dying from passing out in a body of water, doing it alone. Have you heard of, the breathing and deliberate cold exposure being dangerous? And then what are any sort of safety considerations one might have as they're getting into cold exposure practice?
Sure. So, yes, I mean, always recommend to do it with someone. I never tell people to do it by themselves. Always really important to do it with somebody else. Even, for me, I never do it alone. I never do it alone. So I think you should always be doing it with someone. I think keeping it short every single time is super important. 3 minutes is all you need. Not keeping it too cold, like you don't need to sit in pure ice. You're not Wim Hof. Wim Hof, as much as he's able to teach people his method, like he's a different breed. So I think, yeah, having a partner is super, super, super important. Um, I think, is there a correlation between people doing Wim Hof method and passing out in the water? I think anything like this, there's always going to be accidents that happen. But from what I've seen, and I don't know how many thousands of sessions we've done at this point, but we've done a lot, and we're very, very strict on how we facilitate our sessions. People are always asking, like, can I go again? Can I stay longer? No, no, no. We just say no. We have thermometers there, like we're constantly monitoring the temperature of the water. So we're very, very safe. I do want to also mention Tumo, because Tumo is, so I was in India this past summer, studying with a Tibetan monk who we talked a lot about Tumo. And part of the reason why I went there was to learn more about it. And Tumo, I definitely do not advise to practice Tumo without the guidance of a Tumo master. It is a really powerful practice where you can have psychotic breaks, you can lose control of the temperature in your body. You can, start getting really cold and really hot very easily. So it's one of those things now where, especially after meeting with him and talking with him, I don't advise anyone to try it. I think there's a reason why just the monks have been doing it for so long.
Is that the Wim Hof method? Is that similar to
No,
Tumo? Oh, it's
so
okay.
those two are commonly, matched together. They all sort of originate back from Kriyas, from Indian Kriyas, which are powerful breathing exercises and meditation sort of combined together. So none of this stuff is new. Like it's all thousands of years old. Wim Hof just sort of took a few things and put his name on it. And but this has all been, we've been doing this for centuries and centuries. Tumo is, I mean, there's a big difference. Like Wim Hof is hyperventilation and then breath holds on the exhale. Tumo is slow breathing, like you're doing alternate nostril breathing to cleanse, then you're doing slow breathing, and then you're doing breath holds on the inhale. You're doing all types of visualization while you're doing, you're moving the energy throughout your body. You're imagining yourself as a deity. Like it's way more complex.
Okay.
So I think the reason people started pairing it was because they started using Inner Fire as like one of their brands, and Dumo means inner
Oh,
fire in Tibetan. So I think that was kind of how those got grouped together. But uh, yeah, both can be dangerous. And I will say, in terms of safety, there's one thing that I've seen a few times called global transient amnesia, and I've seen this with two different people, and it can be very scary. And what happens is someone goes into the cold, and they're in there, everything's great. They get out, and you say, "How was it?" And they say, "How was what?" They just completely forgotten everything that just happened.
wow.
And it's more common in women between 40 and 60, but I've seen it with men. And again, it's very uncommon. There's no long-term side effects. It's scary for like 15 minutes. And then after that, it's just back to normal. But generally, they kind of have just lost that 15
Mm.
minutes of their life and they never get it back. So it's sort of weird, but I've only seen that happen twice of all the people that we've had.
Mhm.
And I haven't actually heard about it, only happening maybe a dozen times at different places around the world. So I think I've seen it because I just do it with so many people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's another reason why like it's so important to be safe with this practice.
What we are very interested too about if you've seen a connection between like kind of the Wim Hof method um, and tinnitus increasing. We've heard that on some podcast interviews, and we've also maybe experienced some increase in tinnitus sometimes, flaring when we do the cold exposure. And I was doing Wim Hof too, but it's short lived. It just is like a heightened experience for a short
Yeah.
period of time. But do you
Yeah,
see that?
very common. Very common.
What do you
Uh,
think is going on there?
so when you're doing any, activated breathing, you're having these massive carbon dioxide oxygen shifts, right? Um, One of the cool things is like when you're doing faster breathing, right? You're pushing out all your carbon dioxide levels, right? So I talked about carbon dioxide when it's in your bloodstream, it's a vasodilator. So when you hold your breath, your carbon dioxide starts to build and your blood vessels start to increase. But when you're hyperventilating, you're pushing all that carbon dioxide out. So the opposite is happening. It's vasoconstricting your blood vessels. So your blood vessels are getting smaller, making it harder for the oxygen to get up to your brain. So they've done studies where they've actually measured oxygen levels in people's brains, and I mean, it's a huge shift. It goes from the brain being fully oxygenated to looking like there's no oxygen in your brain whatsoever. So I think that's a big part of it, is that you have this massive, decrease in oxygen up into your brain. I think it's, energy is moving through your body. Part of the reason why sometimes you get really hot or cold when you're doing breath work is just energy is kind of shifting and moving throughout your body. Um, so yeah, but that's very common. They now have recently found a correlation between Alzheimer's and people who breathe really shallowly. So breathe a lot because they're pushing all of their carbon dioxide out. It's causing a decrease of oxygen up into their brain. And so they're saying like this might be a big cause for so many people getting Alzheimer's. So yeah, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but yes. So the answer to your question is yes, that tinnitus is very common. Can I pinpoint like the exact reason? No, but my guess would be that change in oxygen levels that you're experiencing.
Do you think it would be reversible for someone if they oxygenated enough to kind of if it stuck for somebody? Like I don't know. It didn't happen for me, but I've heard on a podcast somebody got the tinnitus and it never went away after doing breath work. Um, I don't want to scare anybody, but there's, like you're saying, there's different types of practices that each person should do. And maybe working with a breath coach and learning how to actually just breathe better throughout the whole day before jumping into these popularized, really fast breathing um,
100%.
techniques, right?
Yeah, and that's what I do with my instructors too. Like first we start with functional breathing. How are you using your respiratory muscles? Are you using your mouth? Are you using your nose? We start with really simple exercises. Just make sure people are breathing functionally first. Then we start moving into the breath training side of it, because I think both are really important. And I think, a big part of your lung health is via breath training. You can really improve the health of your lungs by doing breath training. Like you don't have to run. It's part of the reason why doctors started suggesting running so much back in the 70s and 80s, because they're like, oh, strong lungs if you run, but you can do the exact same thing with breath training and breath work. It's a lazier way of doing it, but like, it's 2024. Biohacking is all we're doing. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I do not know about. I haven't heard people on my end. I haven't heard people getting tinnitus that did not go away after the breathing. So I'm not sure about that. But yes, you're right in the sense that it is important to start functionally first and then slowly start increasing.
Yeah. And Kevin, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, we talked about you walking us through a short breath work here. I'm wondering if we could transition into that, maybe a 5 or 10 minute breath work session. You could, Natalie and I will do it, and the listeners, if they're not operating a motor vehicle, or something dangerous, can enjoy that as well.
Yeah, let's do it.
All
Let's do it.
righty.
Okay. So if you guys want to sit up nice and straight, try and make your spine straight. If you want to place your feet flat on the floor and go ahead and close your eyes. If you want to have your hands flat on your knees or holding them just in your lap, that's great. And I'm just going to have you take a few breaths here, nice and slow, out your nose, in your nose. And I just want you to see where your breath is at. So, which part of your body is moving as you're breathing? Noticing the feeling as you breathe in and your belly moves out. Noticing the feeling of your skin pushing out. Checking in with your heart. Noticing its speed. Noticing if it's pumping harder, softer. Maybe it just feels normal today. And as you continue to breathe through your nose, I'm just going to ask you to extend those breaths a little bit more. So as you breathe in through your nose, you need to try and breathe for 1 or 2 seconds longer. And then as you exhale, you're just going to extend that exhale for 1 or 2 seconds longer. As you're breathing in, really filling your torso, filling your belly, filling your ribs, and breathing out, breathing in so much that you are kind of pushing the front part of your body outwards. Taking note of what sensations that's making you feel. Does that feel loose? Does it feel tight? Does it feel mellow, constricted, soft, hard? And as you take a breath in, I want you to think about the emotion that you're feeling right now. Are you feeling calm, tranquil, peaceful? Are you thinking about an email you have to send later today and it's making you feel a little stressed or a little uneasy, a little antsy? Just checking in with that emotion. And on your next exhale, as you breathe out, you're just going to pause for a moment. And as you pause, I want you to check in with any sensations that you're feeling around that emotion. So are you feeling loose? Are you feeling outward? Feeling warm? You feel clenched? You feel open? Just as you breathe in, focus on that emotion, focus on that sensation. As you breathe out, just let it and allow it to process through you. Almost like a river going through a dam. You're just letting those sensations, allowing those sensations to go through you. And extending your breath just a little bit more now. So when you're breathing in, be breathing in slower and a little bit deeper. Taking in just a little bit of air at a time. And as you exhale, you're exhaling really slow. You're letting just a little bit of air out at a time. And checking in with your heart being your official intuition center. I think that's where you're getting a lot of messages every day. We often don't pay attention to our heart until things start going wrong with it. But a lot of times our heart receives messages before the brain does. So it's really important to take time every day and check in with your heart. What's it telling you? Just by focusing on its rhythm, its strength, and its speed. Just giving it a little nod of gratitude for keeping you alive, doing its work every day without you telling it what to do, but still keeping you really healthy. Taking one more big breath all the way in through your nose, slowly letting it go. One more all the way in through your nose. Slowly let it go. Last one, all the way in. And this time you're going to open your mouth, give a loud exhale. Ah. Whenever you're ready, slowly, slowly open your eyes. Come back.
Well, thank you for that, Kevin. That was wow. It's always so important for me to slow down and connect. I just feel all the, I hold a lot of tension in my neck and shoulder region, and when I tune in like that, it's just and pay attention to it, it just starts to relax and dissipate, and that's nice. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Well,
Yeah.
Kevin, if our conversation, this breathwork practice you walked us through is really connecting with people, where's a good place for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so our website is reconnectbreath.com, and you can find us on the gram and Facebook as well. And if you're ever through Playa del Carmen, Mexico, we have breathwork and ice baths on the beach all throughout the week. If you are not coming down here, I facilitate monthly breathwork sessions, which you can find on our website. So those are hour long. Those are kind of breathwork journeys that I do every month, and they're different every month. I try to kind of mix it up between more powerful and more calm. And then we have our online instructor training happening in February, which is a 2 month training. We meet once a week for an hour, and I have I have a whole online academy with videos and lectures and guest lectures, and we do partner exercises and at-home work and all kinds of stuff. And then I have a in-person training that's happening in April here in Playa del Carmen, which is a 6-day in-person instructor training. So we teach you all about breath. We teach you about the science of breath. We teach you how to facilitate breath work, how to guide ice baths. We teach you about the science of the cold. We really throw a lot of great information in there. And we're having a Black Friday sale starting next Friday for anyone who is interested in a nice hefty discount. So all of that will be, yeah, on our website at reconnectbreath.com.
Great.
Awesome. And
We'll link all that in the show notes.
yeah,
Cool.
I can attest to the experience in Playa del Carmen was amazing when I was there a couple of years ago, but it definitely sparked something um a little bit more inspiration in you when you have the group experience like that. So definitely check it out, everyone. Cool.
All
Thank
right. Thanks again,
you.
Kevin.
Thank you so much, guys. It was really nice talking with you both.